All right, we are back and better than ever for episode 3 of Archive Memories, where we are going to talk about some more cards.
I'm not better than ever. I feel like shit.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a theme for this series, really. I mean,
I'm going to
eventually
go ahead
we're
and I'm going to blame it on having to review Data Sucker last time. It hurt me right in my soul.
Yeah, it just sucked all the data out of you.
No data left.
And what can we do without data?
Well, I'll never ascend to wizard status now, unfortunately.
Damn, and we still got to talk about him, too. All right. Well, let's jump right into this, shall we?
We shall.
All right, you want to kick us off here with the next card?
All right, the next card is Medium. So Medium is an Anarch program. It is a virus subtype, costs 3 credits to install and 1 memory. It is 3 influence, and its text reads, whenever you make a successful run on R&D, place 1 virus counter on Medium. Each virus counter after the first on Medium allows you to access 1 additional card from R&D whenever you access cards from R&D.
Fancy.
Yeah, so, Aaron, why did Medium just immediately come out of the gate, start kicking corpse in the nuts, and never stop?
It's a very good question. I think it's just because it is an effect it's an effect that never got any weaker, I think, for runners as a whole, and that's multi-access. Multi-access has been good from the start of the game and was good until it ended, and I don't think there was ever a point where that was not the case.
Right. It was always, if you get in, you want to see more cards, basically.
Seeing more cards is always better than seeing less cards, and Medium always lets you see more cards.
Except for the first time.
Yeah, sure. I mean, unless you had Grimoire.
Yes. Our old friend Grimoire. Yeah, so this is obviously a good card, right? More access is, as you have said, awesome. But one of the things that made Medium so ridiculous is that Medium scales.
Yes, it does not have a cap. If the corp allows you to, so to speak, you could get to where you are accessing their entire deck in one run. Whether that's a good idea or a bad idea.
That sounds like a bad idea.
I mean, if the opponent sitting across from you has a lot of red cards, then it's probably a bad idea. But let's kind of get into the nitty gritty here. How do you play with Medium?
All right. Well, as you mentioned, you generally want to pair it with Grimoire. Like that's not a requirement. Medium can be perfectly serviceable without Grimoire, but it means that you're getting extra accesses right off the bat. The second thing that you want to consider is generally Medium pairs well with an Icebreaker suite that lets you get in frequently for cheap. And that means he also plays nicely with our old friend Data Sucker. Since you're gaining economy for runs and you get to run and gain more accesses every time you get in. That's all awesome. Now, the thing to keep in mind with all of that is that becomes memory expensive. Many multi-access tools do not require any additional memory, which is taken up by Icebreakers or Data Suckers or a Magnum Opus if you're a weirdo and have Magnum Opus and Medium in the same deck. But your memory is limited, so you need to be including, as the runner, solutions on, all right, how much memory am I actually going to require once my rig is set up? Do I have that much memory in my deck? Am I going to be able to get it out reliably? All these are important questions when you're running Medium.
This is true. And really, I mean, as far as to comment about your Magnum Opus and Medium being played together, comment. Back in the core set, I mean, and anything goes, right?
Anything goes, and your economy solutions are kind of limited in the core deck, and Magnum Opus is a permanent solution to the money problem, so there's certainly appeal that way. So if for some reason you were running both of those, you were probably running the last card from the last episode, Jin, which we rated very poorly.
Yeah, at that point, if you're doing that, then I mean, you're
Reconsider
on the
your
downward
life.
spiral. But yes, all very valid points. Now, I will say that memory, I don't think, is too chief of a concern if you are running this with our POW Grimoire, of course, which gives you +2 memory, which is
Yeah,
pretty
it's a big
pretty
help.
good. Additionally, you definitely, as the game went on, got more MU support cards. Really, I guess more specifically in Order and Chaos, with stuff like mem strips. Um, and really, I would say that one MU doesn't really hurt too bad for the type of effect that you get from this card.
Yeah, it's certainly worth.
Yeah, really, I was just going to say that this is the type of card that you don't need to build around it. This goes in a deck that runs a lot of viruses, or the only virus it runs is medium.
Yeah, it just kind of fits nicely. All right, so maybe a slightly more complex question is, how do you play against medium?
Put ice on R&D and purge virus counters.
Regularly?
Cleverly, I guess. I don't know what a good word for that is.
Whenever medium starts looking too spicy, basically.
What's your medium counter ceiling? Like, what for you is the absolute limit that like medium will not get more than this many counters, like no matter
I
what?
get real nervous around 3 counters on medium. If there are 4, I'm basically just gonna purge.
Gotcha. So you would say 4 is like the limit. Like once it's
Yeah,
got 4 on it, pretty much guaranteed that next turn, hell or high water, you're purging virus counters.
pretty much. Yeah, unless I'm very confident that they can't get into R&D, even if they've got a stem hack up their sleeve or something.
So yeah, unless you're like you got it fat stacked with like 4 pieces of ice.
Right.
That's fair. I'd probably say the same. That generally seems like a pretty comfortable number to be purging virus counters at. Um, and like I said, I think cleverly purging virus counters, because the thing is sometimes it feels pretty bad to just be like proactively purging virus counters to keep a
Yeah.
medium from getting fat. So sometimes you got to look at like, okay, how many data sucker counters do they have? How many parasites are there on the board with how many counters? And that's all, of course, going to affect your decision to purge.
And there's other like card counting considerations. So if you've scored, say, 2 agendas and your opponent's stolen 2, but your hand is flooded and you've got 4 agendas in hand, then even if they've got like 4 stacks on their medium, you might be like, you know what, this is an acceptable risk right now.
Yeah, like Lucas would really have to hate me in order for them to pull some more agendas out of R&D at this point.
Right, which he probably does, but
it is why he had forsaken me so many years ago.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I was just going to ask, how did this card affect the meta?
This is another card that I don't know that it per se affected the meta, but more just kind of went along with it. This is an Anarch staple, and I think remained as such for, like I had said, pretty much throughout the game's existence.
Yeah, it never really stopped.
Yeah, I think up until I had stopped playing, which was the end of the game, Anarchs were still running this card. I think I, as like a meme, was running Xers instead of this card, which, like I said, is a meme. But
a little bit. But
yeah,
I mean, there were very rare occasional Anarch decks that wouldn't run medium, but it was basically the standard solution for R&D multi-access for the entire length of the game.
Yeah, this was a card that you always considered, really, no matter what your deck was doing. Now, I would say maybe during the Eater Keyhole days, this definitely had the spotlight kind of taken from it.
My favorite days.
Just so fun, so good. And then what was I going to say? Oh, that I think once the Eater Keyhole days kind of went by the wayside, though, and once it was more just kind of Faust heavy decks, just kind of
Mm.
came back into being really what you slotted.
It's also cheap. It's you throw it down at 3, and now it's just a card that's providing multi-access and pressure on the corp.
Yeah, I think the tempo hit in the early game can feel not awesome sometimes. Because 3 is a weird. I feel like this is going to be a recurring statement from me, but 3 is in a weird spot for me, right? Like 1 and 2 is awesome, and 4 and 5 is definitely like, hey,
Expensive.
yeah, hey, like hope I got a sure gamble, in order to play this. But 3 is like just
Sometimes hurts.
yeah, just skirts that edge, just rides the fence of like sometimes 3 is fine, and sometimes 3 is like I will never financially recover from this.
Yeah. And not to go off on a tangent, but that kind of reveals what seemed like a problem in Netrunner at times is that credits weren't granular enough. That the difference between 2 and 3 credits feels larger than it should be.
Yeah, and that definitely that difference changed quite a bit as the game itself did throughout the years. But yeah, no, I mean, as far as just to wrap up playing against this card, like I said, I mean, it's just you got to protect R&D, you got to honor its existence, and you got to purge virus counters. When it's most effective, make sure it's not going to be too detrimental of a tempo hit to you.
Yep.
And then we got other support cards too, like the Cyberdex cards to, depending on your local meta and how often you are seeing, this card and viruses in general, you slot 1 or 2 of to, kind of soften the blow.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we feel about the flavor?
It's okay. I don't know about you. I'm not in love with the art. Like
Yeah, what is it? It's like a
it's
urn?
an urn, right? It's like a shadowy urn with spooky shit coming out the top of it.
Got some cyber spooks. It's a spooky
Yeah, but
cyber plant.
what the fuck is going on in the background? It feels busy. That's what it looks like to me. Is it feels like there's just random shit there that I don't know what it's doing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that like some weird like smoke or gas or something? But you can actually see that it looks like it's the same picture mirrored on either side of the medium, I think. I think I'm seeing that correctly.
I don't know. I'm not in love with it. Like I like that color of green.
Yeah. The flavor text is decent.
Flavor text is solid, like a little bit spooky feeling,
Yeah,
little bit cyber spook going on. I think the
Dracula
mechanic
suit.
and the flavor kind of mirror each other okay, but not amazingly.
Yeah, they don't necessarily go hand in hand, I'd say. All right, well, let's slap some ratings on old medium here. How are we feeling about our special boy medium?
Um, I think medium gets a 4 from me. Like this is a really excellent card that never lost its power, but it was missing a little something to push it over the edge. It wasn't it didn't do to the game what things like Data Sucker did, right?
Yeah, I think I can agree. This is just a solidly good to sometimes great card. But it is not a card that I would say like is incredible or game defining or anything like that. So I'm gonna have to agree with a 4.
Agreement is sitting real unsteady with me. I'm gonna lie about how I feel about the next card just to throw everything off.
That's fair. Just throw out like a just fake number and then haha, just kidding. I actually rated 17.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on here. All right, we got a bit of a classic on our hands here. Maybe not as classic as some other ones coming up, but a classic nonetheless. So we have Mimic, which is a program icebreaker killer. It is 3 credits to play, costs 1 MU, has a base strength of 3. It reads 1 credit, break sentry subroutine, and it is 1 influence out of the Anarch faction. So, Neon, Isaac, whatever your name is.
Who knows?
Why was Mimic a staple for so long?
The 3 strength is the big reason. 3 base strength is excellent. Let's get that out of the way right here, especially for the first couple cycles of the game, is most sentries were sitting at or below 3 strength. Now, there were a few that went up above that, but the big ones were things like Ichi, which you can click through in an emergency and is only 1 data sucker token away from coming down into Mimic range. This made shit cheap. Cheap to get through. It's easy. No strength pumping required. It's just, oh, how many subroutines are there? That's how many credits I'm paying. And particularly when paired with Data Sucker or maybe weird shit like Ice Carver or a Parasite on a particularly large sentry that maybe came around. This shit popping.
Yeah, pretty well put. I think to kind of go back to what you had said about the 3 strength, 3 was definitely a bit of a magic number for a while. And kind of a bit of a problem, not necessarily a big one, but you could tell that later on in some of the other ice that was designed, that they really had to take more consideration into what strength they were putting sentries at, it seemed like.
Yeah, I think you're right. Later on, we got more stuff that was like up in the 5 range, which starts to be a little bit more complex of a problem for Mimic to deal with.
Yeah, but really, if you're dealing with sentries that are 3 and 4, you're not going to be sweating it too hard. Because, like you said, of course, if it's already at 3, then you're just going to credit through it. And then if it is at 4, it's just going to cost you 1 data sucker token. Or if you have an Ice Carver, which, and yeah, I mean, I guess we'll get to Ice Carver, but I feel like that definitely made some appearances, and especially, I mean, running like a core set deck,
Yes.
would be in there for sure. I mean, really, you got a Mimic and an Ice Carver, excuse me, and you're feeling pretty bad, for any sentries that are in that early onset of the game.
Yeah, for sure.
But
All right.
I apologize. Before we move on, I did want to point out as well that the 1 influence pretty significant as well.
Oh yeah, that's a good shout out. Yeah, because this was also part of the problem with what we're now revealing as Anarch's preposterously good program suite in the core set is it's so cheap. It's so cheap to bring it into other factions. So what you ended up seeing was the Anarch programs everywhere.
Yeah, the early onset of Netrunner and the core set for sure. I mean, it really just seemed like no matter what color you were playing, you were bringing some orange icebreakers.
Yep.
All right, but anyway, how do you play? How do you play with Mimic? How do you run this bad boy?
Well, you install it and you have data suckers, basically. Like, there's other stuff that pairs well with it, too. Obviously, we mentioned Ice Carver, which reduces the strength of ice you encounter. There's Parasites for larger things, which are slowly going to whittle them down into Mimic's range. Hell, there's personal touches that you could slap on top of this and pump its strength up if you were, that sort of a person.
You're that crazy of a guy.
Right, yeah. I mean, you basically just need to account for the fact that you're only going to be able to break things. You're not going to be able to organically pump Mimic strength, and so you pack other solutions accordingly.
Yeah. It's not really as difficult to play around as like a new player or somebody unfamiliar with the game may think that it is at face value.
Right.
Which is it kind of ended up being a little bit of a problem with this, and then a card that we're going to be talking about here very soon, Yogg. In that I think the designers probably meant it to be a little more difficult to play around than it ultimately ended up being. But I
I
don't know.
think you're right.
That may be conjecture on my part.
It probably doesn't help that a lot of sentries kind of went in the direction of more subroutines rather than more strength, which is sure an added tax that you have to deal with. But if Mimic can break it, then you're still not losing your entire hand on a Komainu.
Yeah. And just ice design in general, um, I think was pretty interesting just because the thing about ice, right, is that, ice isn't supposed to stop the runner, at least not indefinitely, right? Because, one of the kind of base interactions of the game is the give and take between, the runner getting into your server versus what they have to pay to do so. And so ice kind of intrinsically isn't quote unquote supposed to stop a runner from getting into your server.
Right.
It's just supposed to, keep them out, except for at a cost, whether that be, tempo, credits, clicks, cards, whatever. And so I think that Fantasy Flight, or the designers at Fantasy Flight, working on Netrunner, kind of throughout its life cycle, but especially early on in response to, Mimic, was that they didn't want to just start pumping out sentries that Mimic couldn't break, because that's not necessarily the point, right? But more, okay, Mimic can break this, but at least at a cost that's greater
Right.
than 2 credits, 1 credit.
Yeah, and you raise an interesting point about like the philosophical approach that was taken with ice in general. Lucas, the original designer, like during the early stages of the game, was famously and rather controversially said that end the run is a crutch, and we'll kind of get into that more like as we encounter more ice. But it was an interesting point that got him a lot of flack early and turned out to be very prophetic for how the game went.
Yes, I had forgotten about that quote, but that was pretty classic quote from Lucas. I remember many a discussion, just in our internal Netrunner group, when that prophetic statement was made.
Indeed.
Classic. How do you play against Mimic though?
Playing against Mimic is basically playing against Data Sucker, because Mimic is far more manageable if you get rid of or account for properly its support cards.
Yeah, it's just kind of another math game, though, depending on, your meta and stuff like that. If you really hate Mimic, there's plenty of hate cards that ended up coming out. Um, I remember I used to double stack Ichis quite a bit, in my hatred for Mimic.
Oh, yes.
And so, not maybe the most nuanced approach to dealing with Mimic, but it worked a lot of times. I mean, 2 Ichis stacked in front of a, barrier or code gate, and, not a great time usually.
Yeah, that becomes problematic to deal with.
But I think that Mimic was not so insurmountable to play against as maybe some other cards. Again, one that we're going to talk about here quite soon. And that at the end of the day, they still did have to pay for it, regardless of it being only 1 credit per subroutine. So as long as you were running sentries that they had to pay something to get through, you weren't feeling that bad.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I do think that I kind of got us off on a tangent, though, so we will circle back, though, to playing with it, though. Because we had touched on, just making sure to combo it with your ice carvers and your data suckers. But when do you really feel safe running with Mimic?
It's gonna depend a lot on the deck you're running against, right? The thing about Mimic is it's risky. It's your sentry breaker, so it's protecting you from the most dangerous AI or ice that's out there. Things like Komainu or Ichi for trashing programs, or Janus for turning your brain into a big smoking husk.
Yes.
So you basically need to be accounting for what you might run into and using your best judgment to say, am I sufficiently prepared for this or not? Am I running against HB? Then I'm probably going to run on my second click at the worst. So I've got a couple of clicks to spend getting through bioroids that might fuck me up that Mimic can't touch.
Yeah, information is pretty key, and I do kind of like a little bit of the design behind Mimic for kind of what you had just said, because that's what your Sentry Breaker is, right? That is your protection against the nasty sentries, which for the most part are going to be doing the things like net damage, trashing programs, brain damage, so on and so forth. But when your protection can't protect itself, so to speak, by boosting strength, that makes things a little more interesting, I think.
Yeah.
So I think that Mimic is probably a card that you play. You probably do a lot of face checking before you throw your Mimic down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Get an idea of what you're dealing with.
Get an idea of the board states, flip some ice, and see what you got going on.
Yeah, it is a bit of a reversal from normal trends because most often, when there's face down ice, you're like, ooh, I don't want to lose these cards I need to a Neural Katana, so I'm just going to slap my my killer down so that I can deal with sentries. But Mimic's a little weird like that.
Yeah, I think it's probably about 50-50. I don't think it's really too much. I don't think it's necessarily a mistake to throw down your Mimic and then start face checking, though it certainly could be.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you've got a spare. I mean, you're probably running two anyway, so if you lose it, it's probably not the end of the world, especially later on in the game, kind of early mid life cycle when there was a lot more recursion to work with.
Yeah, that's a solid shout out. And early on there was a limited amount of ice that was particularly dangerous to Mimic.
Oh yeah, of course that Mimic doesn't give a fuck. Unless you're playing against Wayland and they have a hostile takeover scored, but then at that point, you know what the score is.
Yep. But we'll get to that.
Oh, will we? How did Mimic affect the meta? Did it affect the meta?
Yeah, I mean, it was part of this whole thing. It was part of the many effects, most of which we talked about with Data Sucker, that led to the proliferation of the Anarch Breaker suite into so many other factions. I think, interestingly, the most common place that I saw Mimic was in criminal decks forever. Forever and ever and ever, I saw Mimic in criminal decks, basically until Mongoose got released.
Yeah, because they really needed it. What, you were gonna fucking run Femme Fatale as your killer, as your dedicated killer? Like,
yeah, generally not. And sometimes you would see even if they didn't have Data Suckers or things, they might have a fairy or two to back old Mimic up.
Yeah, Mimic was like just kind of your standard workhorse, and then you would just run some tricks around it to just make up for some of the blind spots, so to speak, that it had.
Sure, and Shaper could do the same thing, run Mimic for regular duty, and then have tricks to pull out a Femme Fatale to bypass something, or a Deus Ex to get past a really nasty piece of APIs.
Yeah, I would almost say that Shaper was particularly good at slotting Mimic and then being able to work around the blind spots that it had.
It was interesting. It's an Anarch card that fit perfectly in with the other factions basically all the time.
Yeah, Mimic's one of those cards where it's like it's orange, but I mean, really, you might say that it's white with an influence cost.
It sleeps around a lot.
Exactly. Mimic is a dirty slut, so to speak. But it's okay.
Okay.
Because that led to winning games. Let's talk about flavor. What do we feel about the flavor on Mimic?
I like the art. Like, it's the whole Guy Fawkes mask thing going along with Anarchs and the this like suite of masks that it seems to be. It's interesting. I kind of like it, and I kind of like the like digital screen effect they put over the top of it. I always thought that looked nice on the card.
Yeah, I do think that is pretty cool. That it's like you're making your selection, choose your fighter.
Yeah,
I do want to point out, is that mask on the left, is that supposed to be like Vega's mask from Street
look
Fighter?
like it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I know that the Vega's mask is like half of it is like completely white and doesn't have an eye hole, right? I may be misremembering.
I'm not 100% positive, but it is reminiscent of Vega's mask at any rate.
Yeah. And then as far as the one on the right, I don't really know what that's supposed to be other than just like a generic like geisha mask or something. I don't know. If there's a reference there, I don't get it.
Well, the flavor text is obviously a reference which goes with Guy Fawkes in the middle there. November 5th, the day when all would see the corrupt machinations of the corporate oligarchy.
Remember the 5th of November.
Because even then, you were fucking installing Mimic.
Yep, even even back in the day. Fun fact that Alan Moore just loved Mimic so much that that's why he wrote V for Vendetta.
That.
All right, how are we feeling on Mimic?
Mimic is a 3. Because it's 3 cost, 3 strength, 3. No, I'm kidding. Mimic's a 4. It basically fits into a similar category as Medium, where it was just really good at what it did. It wasn't a game defining card by itself, and it needed some help here and there, but it was really good.
Yeah, I will say that you got me. I made a face when you had said 3. But yeah, I'm actually a little surprised. I thought that you might give Mimic a 5.
I thought about it, but I think partially because Mimic fell off late and because you did kind of need some other solutions in your back pocket in order to work around with Mimic.
Yeah, Mimic definitely lost the spotlight later on in the game to, the turtle and things.
Yeah, fuck that turtle.
Stupid ass turtle. But yeah, no, I'm giving it a 4 too. All right.
Okay. Next up, we got a spicy one that I know that you are in particular a fan of. Should I take this away?
Oh yeah.
Right. We've got Parasite. So Parasite is an Anarch program. Again, we're not done with them yet. It is 2 credits to install, 1 memory. It is a virus program. It reads, install Parasite only on a rezzed piece of ice. Host ice has -1 strength for each virus counter on Parasite and is trashed if its strength is 0 or less. When your turn begins, place 1 virus counter on Parasite. And it's 2 influence to splash out of action. So, Aaron Kika, why do you hate this card perhaps more than any other?
That is a really good question. I would say because I love ice more than any other card type in the game. And so my love for ice is directly proportional to my hatred for Parasite. Because this stupid fucking card would just not stop getting rid of it for like basically the entire lifespan of the game, and really ultimately culminating to a point where they finally just had to take this shit out of the game. Thank Boggs.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's let me expound upon that. You got me started here, so you start me up, I never stop, as Aerosmith famously said. Parasite is one of the more prime examples of a kind of concept that I talked about, earlier with cards like StimHack, is that this card, the design of this card, I think, lacked some needed foresight with how the game was going to end up and how cards were ultimately going to interact with it. Because just to speak plainly, the interaction with Data Sucker specifically, but also we'll kind of throw Ice Carver in there, but really anything that lowers strength, which I think just out of pure fear. I don't really know that they ended up printing much of anything else that did lower strength, thank God, of ice. But that combo, really specifically of the Parasite to Data Sucker, was just too strong. And it wasn't immediately evident that it was too strong. But with the landscape that the game kind of ended up in, it definitely got to a point where it was too strong. Oh wait, no, I forgot. They did print another card that was the biggest offender, which is why they needed to take the shit out of the game eventually. Was that stupid ass was console, right? Cipher.
Yes.
That was an absolute
Dumb
nightmare.
card.
Absolute nightmare.
We'll one day perhaps get to that card, but that was a dumb card that shouldn't have been printed.
But anyway, so I think, and I don't even necessarily think that it's like, oh man, Parasite should have never been printed. Like I'll save those comments for noise. But Parasite, I think, could have used just some small tweaks in its mechanics to be in a perfectly fine spot that I don't think, would have just ravaged the game for years to come.
It did definitely do that, didn't it? This card never went away.
It never went away until, like I said, they took it out of the game, upon the Core 2.
Okay, so you're the Corp. How do you play against this card? Because it is certainly a card that mandates playing around.
Nyan, would you like to hear about our Lord and Savior, the Fast Advance archetype as a whole?
Sure, tell us about that.
So it's this great thing where you don't have to protect agendas with ice. And for the most part, you only have to install a couple pieces of ice that are just cheap enough to get eaten by a parasite without making you want to cry. But then you can still score agendas because they never touch the table.
This sounds fascinating. How do I take part?
Well, you run NBN and you run AstroScript Pilot Program. Congratulations, you did it.
This sounds a lot like some piece of shit I knew named me that used to do this all the time.
Yeah, so, facetiousness aside, I mean, I think this card ending up where it was, just with instant install parasites and, data suckers and, just being able to just destroy things at instant speed, especially, with Cipher, not that Fast Advance hadn't already, firmly been in place as one of the most powerful corp archetypes for a long time by the time Cipher got printed. I think that response to stuff like Noise Shop and Anti-Sucker as well, but just Parasite being as powerful as it was, playing Fast Advance was such an easy way to not have to deal with this.
True.
Because if I don't have to worry about my ice getting destroyed because I don't have to worry about protecting remote servers with ice, then Parasite holds no power over me at that point.
Right. Parasite's an interesting case because you're basically exchanging a click with the Corp, but the Corp only has 3 clicks to your 4, so it's pretty much universally a positive exchange in your case. Also added to that the Parasite is 2 credits, and most ice is more than that, so you're almost always trading up.
Yeah, it always felt bad resing any piece of ice just against Anarch, because in the back of your head you knew this is probably going to get Parasited.
Yeah.
And not even necessarily the early pieces of ice, because once Recursion kind of reached event horizon, so to speak, in the game, then they could be playing like a dozen parasites throughout the game, and chances are, if you slotted more than a dozen pieces of ice, you were a fucking chump.
Yeah, God help you if you were up against an Anarch that was just plowing through their deck and was running Deja Vus and and imported a Levy AR. So once they got through their whole deck, it's all happening all over again.
Yeah, and they got clone chips in there. It's just a bad time. Um, but I mean, we've already, I think, touched on it a little bit with that conversation. But how do you play with Parasite?
Install it on the most obnoxious pieces of ice you can.
Right, or install it on a piece of ice that you know you're going to be able to get to 0 strength this turn.
Right. Yeah. Just open up holes. Parasite punches holes in the corpse defense. It takes their plans and it takes a big green glowing dump directly on them.
Almost literally. Because I mean, we'll get to the art here, in a bit. But come on. And there's so many ice that Parasite makes so sad.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the core set alone, like Roto Turret, like you were dead as soon as you got printed, my boy.
Which is a shame because Roto Turrets, I've always had a soft spot for it.
I do too. I like Roto Turret. I ran Roto Turret probably far past its shelf life in the game. But yeah, I mean, Roto Turret, who gives a shit? Just put a Parasite on it, it's gone. Boom. It's easy. 1, 2, bam, boom. You're out of here. Put it in the garbage. In fact, put it in the real life garbage. But yeah, I mean, playing with Parasite, it has always been pretty straightforward, but it did get some. I don't want to say nuance because I think that implies some amount of cleverness or smartness. Clearly, I have that. But with interactions like being able to install via clone chip and use data sucker and things like cipher, there were definitely interactions that had to be considered to kind of make it do as much work as it ended up doing. But really, it boiled down to play Parasite on things, and if it doesn't eventually die just from virus counters, just run into it and lower its strength, and you're golden.
Yep, pretty much. Okay, how did it affect the meta then?
I think we probably already had this discussion. It affected the meta in that it made ice not very good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a long time before real ice suites became a thing that happened regularly, and it is largely Parasite that's to blame. You, of course, mentioned Cipher and its interactions. That was a very profound impact on the meta that gives me traumatic flashbacks to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when that card got printed is actually when I had taken my sabbatical, so to speak, from the game. Which is something I think kind of happened with everybody. I think everybody at one point during that cycle was like, "Is this really fun anymore?" Unless you were a dickhead, and then you were like, "Hey, hey.
You only get your cubes stepped on so many times.
Yeah." And that's the thing, being a resident next design meme lord, and just somebody who likes to play ice and defend servers with ice and have the runner interact with my ice. Parasite Cipher almost seemed like just like, all right, well, you're just not allowed to play with that anymore.
Yeah, it kind of a bummer.
Yeah, I mean, even Parasite in the kind of vanilla sense of just with like data suckers and things wasn't awesome, but it at least wasn't so powerful that it, just completely negated, running like ice rush decks and things like that, or glacier decks or super servers, those sorts of decks that utilize ice to some expected effectiveness. um Parasite and Data Sucker didn't just invalidate those strategies, like once Cipher came about, that pretty much did.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. And in Parasite's defense, it was far more difficult to import into other factions and be effective.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a star Anarch card. This was not one of the cards, kind of like we talked about with Mimic and stuff, where you just kind of throw this into whatever deck and, it immediately fits. I mean, this was really a card, made for Anarchs by Anarchs. But yeah, I think that Parasite probably I feel like it maybe teeters on such a fine line that Parasite um I think could have been totally fine. I mean, it definitely wouldn't have been the amazing card that it ended up being, but I think that Parasite would have been totally reasonable, totally fine if it just read, trash host piece of ice when Parasite has, equal to or greater than virus counters to its strength, whatever, however that verbiage is. But I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Would it have been awesome? Like, no, but it would have been better than what we ended up eventually getting.
Okay. One little point that I want to raise about Parasite before we move on is that I appreciate in that Parasite was a card that forced decisions. And decisions was maybe the best part about this game, is that it wasn't a game where you just drew the card and you played the card and everything was obvious and straightforward and your deck would almost play itself once you understood the rules and the optimal lines of play. Parasite made the corp interact with it, and you had to make decisions about where it was the most effective. Parasite was a very heavy decision based card on both ends. And that made for uncomfortable decisions in both cases. It's like, oh, there's all this ice. Where do I want to put my Parasite? Where will it be most effective? On the corpse side, it was, when do I trash over this Parasite? Do I just get rid of it now? Do I do so later? It was a card that made for interesting board states.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of reluctantly agree. I'll maybe say that I think that it definitely had that kind of air or aura about it for a time. I do think that there was a lot of room for completely brain dead autopilot decisions. When you're stacked up with
Later
20
in the
data sucker
interaction,
tokens and or whatever. But
yeah, those interactions you're talking about with instant speed destruction and such, I will grant were kind of toxic. But when this went on the board and stayed on the board for a turn or two, potentially, that was where Parasite was fun and interesting, I think.
yeah, I mean, I don't think that. I think Parasite maybe suffered an undeserved fate. Like I said, I think that errata-ing it to just trash the ice when it had, maybe not even equal to the ice host ice's strength and power counters. Maybe even if it just when Parasite hits X power counters,
Mhm.
trash the piece of ice. I think that Parasite could have been fine if it just didn't have that once the ice is zero strength kind of clause to it.
Perhaps.
So do I think that Parasite maybe ultimately met a fate that it didn't deserve? It may be weird coming from me, but I think maybe Parasite didn't ultimately deserve the fate that it ended up with.
Interesting. Reconciliation at the end.
Yeah, I think that they could have errated this to fix it. Rather than just deleting it. But, I mean, honestly, this caused me so much pain, I can't say that I was sad when I saw it got deleted.
I'm not surprised.
All right, what flavor is Parasite?
Parasite, as previously mentioned, is big, glowy green turd flavored.
Yeah, so probably green apple, right?
Probably. Uh, I like the art a lot, actually. I think it's very striking. Like, obviously, the Parasite himself looks gross, but he's supposed to look gross.
Yeah, I do. I do like it too. It's very recognizable. Just something about the color and the way that the parasite itself is shaped. When it hits the table, you definitely know that bad times are here.
That
Which I appreciate.
signature anarch green of shit's about to go down.
Right. And then you got some cool like cyber shit going on in the background. It's like in the Matrix. It's hanging out.
It is a matrix worm.
All right. What do we rate Parasite?
Uh, Now I understand that a lot of these sorts of scores have been given out, but this is the Anarch program suite. This is just the way shit is. But I'm giving Parasite 5 stars.
Um, I am reluctant to give it 5 stars because I hate it so much. So similar to Noise, I think that I'm just out of principle going to have to give it a 4.
I suspected that you might, but yeah, this is a great card.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that you can really say about it is that it's too good. Or at least ended up being too good. But I'm sticking with a 4. Just not going to happen. Not giving Parasite a 5. Okay. Oh, we have a good one next.
All right, yeah. Aaron, you wanna tell the people about our friend Wyrm?
Boy, howdy do I. So Wyrm is a one to install 1 MU program. It is an icebreaker, and it is an AI. It has 1 strength, and it reads, quite humorously, 3 credits, break ice routine on a piece of ice with 0 or less strength. 1 credit, ice has a -1 strength, and 1 credit plus 1 strength. And it is 2 influence out of the Anarch faction. So, Isaac,
Uh-huh.
why is Wyrm perhaps the greatest Netrunner card ever printed?
All right. Well, for starters, it's 1 to install. This is incredibly cheap. This is an AI icebreaker, so this guy can break subroutines of any kinds of pieces of ice out there.
Anything. It can break anything.
Anything. So for 1 credit, you've got an entire breaker suite. How good is that? You don't have to, draw other cards. You don't have to install them. You've got all of this memory free for you to install 3 mediums and dig forever.
A 2 influence, so very splashable.
Okay, I can only keep this up for so long. Wyrm is such hot garbage.
Yeah, Wyrm fucking sucks, dude. A hot take, but yeah, this card is terrible.
Okay. 2 reasons why this card is terrible. I'm going to take the first one, and you can take the other one.
Sure.
Number 1, 3 credits to break a subroutine. Are you fucking kidding me? 3 credits. 3. 1 subroutine costs 3 times as much as Wyrm costs here. 3 credits to break 1 subroutine. To get past 1 subroutine costs me as much as installing a Grimoire, as installing a medium. Holy dicks. What a cost.
Yeah, it's not good. As we previously discussed, Mimic breaks those subroutines for 3 times less.
3 times less. And on top of all of that, Wyrm, this piece of shit, in front of God and everyone, decided that he was only going to break ice subroutines on a piece of ice with strength 0 or less.
Yeah,
My God.
what a distinction to have been made. All right, well, you want me to go ahead and take reason 2 here?
Tell the people reason 2.
And I think I know exactly what you're talking about. But so even this, right, may not seem that bad because it's like, okay, all right, well, surely there's got to be something else that you do here. Maybe the point of Wyrm is not to break ice. You think. Maybe the point of Wyrm, because it does say that the first thing after breaking ice subroutine, it says 1 credit. Ice has -1 strength. Like, that seems pretty fucking good, right?
Sure.
Yeah, like no other card does that. Like Data Sucker only does that with a fucking token that I gotta go through hell and high water to get on it.
Your virus counters get purged.
Yeah. But no, because in Netrunner ice interactions, ice and icebreaker interactions, I guess that is, work in a very specific way. So Wyrm cannot even do that thing, that 1 credit ice has -1 strength thing, that thing that I said sounds pretty good. It can't even do that until it matches the strength. So what it really means is that it's basically 2 credits. Ice has -1 strength.
Blech.
Like, just absolute trash.
Yeah. You could have run this card at the very end of the game's life cycle when everybody was just shitting money and it's still too expensive.
Yeah,
What were
like,
they of?
it's humorous actually. If you look at some of the reviews on Netrunner DB for Wyrm, that cover what the cost would be for like certain ice to be able to like lower their strength. It's abysmal. Um, it's just I don't know what they were thinking when they printed this card.
I think it was a joke. I think someone complained about, but what if I don't have my virus tokens and I really need to get into the server? And Lucas was just like, you know what? Fine. Here's this card. Fuck you.
Yeah, like it's just it was bad from the start, and it has been bad ever since. And really, into the furthest reaches and echoes of the cosmos, once the inevitable heat death of the universe has taken place and all existence is but a memory in some vague ethereal realm locked in a box that may have never existed at all, the knowledge contained within that whisper will still ring true that Wyrm fucking sucks.
Yep. Yep. That's about it.
Yeah,
Um,
so let's slap a rating on this. I don't even want to talk about any of the other shit.
yeah, fuck this card. 0 stars.
Yeah, I also give it 0.
Fucking 0 stars. That's what you get, Wyrm. You are just such a piece of shit. Consider your life and how you could have lived it better.
I mean, I guess we did skip past this, but I will say that the art is pretty cool.
The art is pretty cool, but it's
But
not cool enough to give him a star.
yeah, no, not cool enough to warrant a star, and honestly, maybe even worth removing a star, just on the principle that the cool art was wasted on such a terrible card. Like, honestly, Sandera Tang, I'm sorry, my man. Like,
They could have at least given us a Wyrm playmat at some point, but they
yeah,
couldn't
right.
even do that for us.
Yeah, do something with this art. Like, this art's cool, but no, you got to put it on this steaming pile of cyber dookie.
Get this shit out of my face. I've had enough.
Yeah, I don't want to see it anymore. It's making me physically ill. Oh, this is a palate cleanser, though. Maybe, I don't know. This also makes me ill in other ways.
Different sort of ill.
All right. Is it your turn? Do you get to read this one? Did I read
Uh,
Wyrm?
I think it's my turn. Sure, fuck it. All right,
Yeah.
here we go. Yogg.0. Yogg.0 is an Anarch program. It costs 5 to install, so we're going up in the world, and one memory. It is an icebreaker decoder, and its text reads 0 credits, break Codegate subroutine. Oh, and it has 3 strength and is 1 influence to splash.
Some appealing numbers on that card.
Boy, does it. So compare this, if I may, trudge this up recently. How many credits was it for Wyrm to break a subroutine?
It was 3 more than 0.
3 more than 0. So this is 3 less than 3.
I mean, are you a math magician?
I am. I don't know if our audience can tell, but I have the big brains. So, all right, Aaron, why was this card just bananas?
I mean, I think we already talked about it a little bit, but it is that magic number. I've used that term a few different times, but really this is where I should have been saving it. I think, maybe I overused it up to now. But the most magic of all numbers is both in the title and in the description, or I guess the text box rather, and that's 0, because this breaks code gate subroutines for free. FREE, that spells free, runs on your central servers for me if you have code gates that are 3 strength or less.
Yep, that's pretty good.
And additionally, the other magic number here is the 1 influence. So it breaks code gates for free if they're 3 or less, and you can throw it into basically any deck that you want.
Yes. And obviously, the 0 credit thing combos incredibly well with stuff we've mentioned previously, like data suckers and mediums, where repeat runs are very advantageous because it's fucking free.
You can't get any better. I mean, well, actually, I lied. You can get better.
Yeah, if you've got
Because
Desperado.
Yep, because this was a very key player in the deck archetypes that we had discussed in earlier episodes, where you would be making runs and making money off those runs. You would be at a net positive on those runs, because the benefits that you got from running the server would outweigh the cost that the cost of getting into said server.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
how do you play with it?
So I feel like we basically discussed this at this point. It's Mimic, but better and a little more expensive. And for code gates, it you don't get to increase its strength, so you play around that with other cards. You've got your data suckers, maybe an ice carver, a personal touch, or a dinosaurus if you're a shaper weirdo. Maybe some Davids. Maybe some Davids in there to just get rid of the big bad boys that are 5 or 6 strength code gates that are out there. And then you just get in cheap. You invalidate a lot of ice with Yogg's existence. So many times I've seen Corpse just install over 3 pieces of ice as soon as I put Yogg on the board because they're just like, none of this serves any purpose anymore.
Yeah, the Yogosaurus, like you had mentioned, the Yogg and Dinosaurus combo, was pretty strong in some play groups that I had seen. I mean, being able to just break 5 and lower code gates for free, pretty ridiculous.
Yes.
Not that it was ever like a powerhouse in the meta or anything, but this is the kind of card that you can get to work in so many different ways. It just works, in the words of Todd Howard, it just works.
It just works. For a lot less than repeat Skyrim buys.
Oh yeah. But how do you play against this as a core?
You throw away all of your 3 or less strength code gates. You get rid of them. They go in the trash. Then you find better things. And oftentimes, particularly early in the game's life cycle, that meant you had no code gates anymore. Yogg was installed, and from then on, code gates didn't matter.
Yeah, for a time, code gates pretty much existed just to make your opponent have to pay 5 credits to install Yogg. Because for as great as Yogg is, it does cost 5 to install, like we mentioned. So it's not cheap to get on the table. You're making up for that. You're making up for those savings somewhere.
I'm fairly confident in saying that the primary reason that Tollbooth saw any play early on in the game's life cycle was because of Yogg, because it's a 5 strength code gate that would tax anyway, even if Yogg did get pumped to the point where it could break it.
Perfect segue. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be my next point, was that outside of the, just kind of your normal code gates that would exist just for kind of really basic gear check, right? Like, hey, I'm going to throw this Victor down, just to make them have to play the Yogg. But Tollbooth is a different story. Everybody's got to pay for Tollbooth. Well, everybody except, certain lady that we'll get to eventually. But doesn't give a shit about Yogg, or Yogosaurus. You could be running, your sweet little Yogosaurus setup. Don't care. Tollbooth says, give me those 3 credits.
Credits is not nothing.
3 credits is significant. especially in that early portion of the game where runner economy, or really just kind of economies in general, didn't get as inflated as they ended up. 3 credits was quite significant.
Certainly enough that you would not just immediately throw your toll booth away, especially when you're not running into Yoggosaurus, when it's just a normal Yogg, and the runner's having to spend data sucker tokens to get Yogg through there. Toll booth was a very important piece of ice early for this reason.
Yes, toll booth was. I mean, is it fair to say that toll booth was Yogg's kryptonite?
I would say so, yeah.
I mean, toll booth. It's good that because for as good as that Yogg was and remained through the majority of the game, toll booth was always there as an answer to it, which I appreciate. Even if you were annoyed with Yogg's existence from day one, hey, in that same little box that has Yogg, toll booth's in there too to help you out. But yeah, pretty much the way you play against Yogg is you run cheap gear check code gates until they get it out, and then after that you just run toll booth. So your code gate makeup was probably something like 3 Enigma, 2 code gate, or
Yeah.
excuse me, two toll booths in the early games. That was probably your code gate makeup.
Pretty much. Maybe a chum or two if you're playing Jinteki.
Yeah. Maybe not even 3 Enigma. You probably, honestly, probably better split is 2 Enigma, 3 toll booth, honestly. I guess depending on who you're playing. Though.
All right. So, how did this card affect the meta?
It affected the meta in that I think that. So as we know and kind of discussed earlier, and we'll get into some probably more deep and detailed discussions later, fast advance was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Yogg is just one example of a card that just kind of inched the needle toward Corpse, wanting and eventually you might say needing to be able to fast advance to remain relevant.
Yeah.
Just because being able to break code gates for 0 credits, it's like the ice is not there in some scenarios.
Philosophically, you might say.
Right. And so how do you deal with that? Like I discussed earlier, is you score agendas without having to put them on the table. Or I guess leave them on the table rather, but so I won't say that it I think had a super profound effect on the, long-term meta of the game. It was a piece of a puzzle, and the image on that puzzle was Corpse needing to be able to either fast advance or kill the runner to win.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that. And it's such an impactful sort of ability that it was something you always took into consideration when building your ice suite.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, though, for as good as it is, I would say that you may even say that, oh, well, okay, well, it was indisputably the best code gate breaker in the game, for X amount of time. But it really wasn't. Despite being so good, many decks ran Gordian Blade instead of Yogg.
Because Gordian Blade's safe.
Sure. Gordian Blade doesn't need any gimmicks. But out of things like Andy Sucker, though, always got to slot the Yogg.
Right.
Okay, I think we're on to flavor. Unless you had any closing comments about our boy Yogg here.
I think that about covers it.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop you before you get into your comments here, because I did have a distinct thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to Yogg. And I feel like flavor is the best point to bring this up. So how do you pronounce this card's name?
Most of the time, I didn't bother to try, and I just said Yogg, and that's kind of what we did. But Yogg.o is is how I is how I would commonly wind up pronouncing it.
Okay, so Yogg.o or Yogg.0. I think I would usually say Yogg.0.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just kind of semantics. All right. Well, I want you to keep that in mind because there is another card in the game that people pronounce in a different way, and it pisses me off because they will pronounce it Yogg.0, and then this other card that we will get to soon enough, they will pronounce it another way, and it is the most annoying thing to me. But I just wanted to plant that seed there.
Okay. All right. We'll be ready for it.
Anyway, blue key.
Yep. Yep. It's a blue key. I wish the art was more like it's not bad, but I wish it was more cyber.
I was gonna say the same thing. It doesn't even look particularly cyber or net spacey or computery. It just looks like a nice painting of the key.
It kind of does.
I do think the flavor text is pretty cool though.
Yeah. You want to go ahead and read that for the people?
Yeah, the Yogg.0 database is a crowdsourced compilation of sniffed, spoofed, and logged passkeys. If the key to the gate is in the database, you're in. If it's not, change the gate. And I think that's kind of thematic with sort of how it works, and that it's 3 strengths, and it'll get you in for free if it is 3 strengths, but higher than that, you're gonna have problems.
All kind of matches. It's got kind of a flavorful story going for it. And it even like plays nicely with the Anarch theme of like crowdsourcing shit.
Right. I do like that. I think thus far, Yogg has kind of one of my more liked flavor texts. Certainly not my favorite in the game, but I do like
Good
it
one.
quite a bit.
7 out of 10.
All right. So speaking of numbers out of numbers, what rating are we bestowing upon Yogg.0?
This is a bit weird.
It is.
And I'm gonna get some flack, but I'm giving Yogg a 3.
You know what? I thought that you might say 3. I don't know why, but I just had this inkling that Yogg was going to fall at a 3 for you.
Yogg was very impactful and was very good, but it wasn't forever. And its fall was precipitous and rapid. And
This is true.
And it became so ubiquitous that everyone learned to play around it. And I feel like it lost something as a result of that.
Yeah, I do agree with that. It kind of had a free fall out of the meta. It just kind of seemed like one day Yogg just wasn't that good anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was never bad, obviously, but I think one thing that didn't help that is that once people kind of caught wise to Yogg and we had more options for playing around it, you didn't really have to play around it anymore. You simply just slotted code gates that couldn't get messed up by Yogg.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we eventually ended up with things like Lotus Field. Really more particularly Lotus Field. I think there were, and then just higher strength code gates in general. I loved when Victor 2.0 showed up in Creation and Control.
It felt like Yogg was enough of a problem that it just kind of got silver bulleted right out the window.
Yes, it was one of the cards that they kind of were able to solve by printing silver bullets. That definitely didn't work with every card, but Yogg did get kind of solved by them just printing enough code gates that didn't get clowned on by it. So eventually it just wasn't really that much of a problem anymore, and thus, people looked elsewhere.
Yeah.
So you gave it a 3. I am still, though, going to give it a 4.
That's fair too. I was kind of on the fence between the two. I stand by my rating, but I understand a 4.
Yeah, I think it's just a little too strong to put it a 3. Um, just even when it fell out of favor, it was still never necessarily a bad card to include, as long as you had the right options to make it work. Because free is free, and
He
free is
is free.
significant. All right, well, we got through 5 cards today, so it seems to be about the average.
I like to think of us as above average, but you know what?
Well, I
The
mean,
data
our
doesn't lie.
average is above average. That's just average for us.
Okay.
But we will get to some more cards here soon. We are pretty close to out of the Anarch cards, if not. Is Yogg the last Anarch card? I don't know.
I think we've got one more to go.
Oh yeah, true, and it's one that we mentioned. Yeah, so we are almost out of the orange cards. That's that's going to be a triumph for us. So these are exciting days. We're going to get into some cards that are not Anarch cards.
Future is now.
All right. Well, with that, I am going to go ahead and end our run right now.